Hi guys, welcome back to Hobbit Hole Books. My name is Matt, also known as Miggins on Twitter, and I have an extremely exciting review for you guys today. It is an indie arc called An Ocean of Others by Joshua Scott Edwards. Now, I literally just finished this yesterday. This was the book that I was reading whilst I was away on my expedition in the Highlands, and I was just furiously reading it. It was great. I took my Kindle with me, and I really had a lot of fun reading this book. So, let's dive straight in. So what is this book about? I'm just going to read the blurb on my laptop here. Remember what's real, or your head will be theirs. This is something that the tagline, I didn't get it at the time. I thought it was cool. It's a cool tagline. But once you read it, you will understand it. And it's quite cool, the little twist. Survival is never easy, but it's never been harder for Grim, the last bounty hunter in Lewokin. He survived the great riot that killed Lewo by the thousands, endured the bloody chaos that ruled the city in its aftermath, and avoided the crushing fist of the agency created to quell the unrest. Rule of law returned, but following the rules doesn't put food in your belly. On a job gone wrong, Grim stumbles into a conspiracy that targets Alkin, the head of the agency, a man who has done more to ruin Grim's life than any other. Struggling to earn honest coin, Grim plans to use this information to rise quickly through the ranks of the organisation so an empty purse never worries him again. He becomes a finger of the agency, joining a sardonic ranger, two fugitive siblings, a stone-skinned scar dwarf, and a powerful dark mage, none of whom know any better than Grim what they've gotten themselves into. Grim's hand soon discovers the agency's furtive work is far deadlier than hunting bounties. While fighting to save his home from monsters who once were men, Grim discovers the conspiracy runs deeper than just Alkin and the agency. What was unleashed is spreading, and if Grim's sanity doesn't prevail, it will consume the minds of the Bright Empire and beyond. Now, I'm so grateful to Joshua, who is my lovely friend over on Twitter, for sending me a copy of this book on the Kindle and e-arc. And it was a really fun time. And I mean, just look at this cover. This cover is just glorious. And it's really what drew me to the project. I mean, if you just look at it, I've got it up here. It's like this bloodied sword and this guy reaching out like, no, don't kill me. You know, it seems brutal and gritty and dark, and there's fire, and it's everything that I could kind of hope and want for. And it did set my expectations for this book. Now, what I will say is that the expectations I had going into this book and what the book actually was didn't quite fit together. Now, that doesn't mean that it's a book I didn't enjoy, that wasn't good. It just means that I think that it was marketed as sort of a grimdark, and perhaps it's just me, and I'm just abnormally resistant to sort of brutal things, but there were grimdark elements to it. It was quite brutal at times, and it was very gritty. There was certainly a gritty atmosphere to it, but it never felt fully grimdark to me. It is actually more sort of D&D inspired, so it's sort of a fusion of D&D adventure and grimdark. And if you read the note at the beginning of the book, the author actually talks about how it came out of his friend's D&D game that he was part of. It inspired him to write this novel, and you can actually that spirit just runs throughout the entire book. And so I would say set your expectations that this is like a grimdark D&D adventure, more on kind of like the D&D vibes. Now, this book got off to a fantastic start. There was an exciting chase sequence, and we were going through this city, and there was this talk of basically this thing called the riot, which happened, which was like this devastating event, devastating riot that nearly destroyed the city. And afterwards, out of the ashes of this riot, this guy called Ulken became head of what they called the agency, and he used the agency to restore law and order to the city. And so we find the city in the aftermath of this riot. The agency is looking after the city, and this city just oozes atmosphere. In fact, if you know H.L. Tinsley's book, We Men of Ash and Shadow, that I've sort of started reading, and I got very similar vibes at the beginning, almost like a gas lamp vibe. And that city was fantastic. That chase sequence was fantastic. It really, really set the tone. And then things sort of shifted a little bit. So it starts off with this, I was expecting that it's going to be some gritty conspiracy, gas lamp, detective thriller almost. But then it morphs into this D&D adventure. And so basically what happens is this main character called Grim, and I can't remember what his full name is, but he's basically called Grim throughout the whole book. And he's a bounty hunter, and the job goes wrong, and he finds a clue pointing towards a potential conspiracy to take down Ulken, who is the head of this agency that has taken over the city. And basically, it becomes almost impossible to be a bounty hunter because the agency kind of almost outlaws that and takes all their jobs from them. And so he decides, after a chance encounter, why not just join the agency? If you can't work, he needs some form of income, so he's going to join the agency as what they call a finger. And each rank is sort of based off of a sort of a body part. So you have the head, Ulken, the fingers, and several others that we go into. Essentially, you have that kind of like thing in D&D where you have the group, the ragtag bunch of group, kind of by circumstances brought together. And the rest of the book is essentially them going on several quests to defeat these mysterious monsters that are being found in the wilderness. There's lots of eerie goings on in sort of towns surrounding Lewokin. And this group, what they call the Hand 64, and so a hand is basically a group of fingers, which makes sense, and they're put together and sent out on this mission to discover what just is going on in these towns surrounding Lewokin, because there's something not quite right. And in the background, you then have this conspiracy, or this potential conspiracy going on with Ulken potentially being betrayed by someone very, very close to him. And Grim is trying to figure out who's his enemy, who are his friends. Eventually, the story spirals out from there. But as I said, it was a very episodic structure. It was a very weird mix. I can definitely see the influence of the D&D, because essentially once Grim is part of this hand and he joins, it's basically sort of they're sent out on a quest, they complete the quest and they learn a little bit more about what's going on, a little bit more about the conspiracy. They come back, have a little brief break where there's some more kind of overarching stuff going on, and then they're sent out on another quest, and each quest kind of gets worse and worse and harder to complete, until kind of like the big final boss battle. And then the book kind of ends with, it's not cliffhangery, so if you don't like cliffhangers, this book will be good for you. There's a little bit of a hook at the end, but it wraps it up quite neatly. And so for me, it definitely was a different thing than I was expecting, but as I adjusted my expectations, I did enjoy it. I really enjoyed the first sort of 10% where we were introduced to Grim and the city. And then when it started to go into the more sort of episodic D&D stuff, I did sort of lose interest a little bit. Not because it was bad writing or anything, it's just, it wasn't what I expected. And so I had to readjust my expectations. And the emotions, although Joshua did an admirable job, at least initially, they didn't quite hit. By the end, it got better. It never fully hit me, but it certainly was an admirable job. I think for a debut, this was a really fantastic attempt to draw out the emotion. But for me, it just didn't quite hit. But I think for some people, it really will be quite intensely emotional. But I think perhaps this book could have benefited from being a little bit longer. So in the sort of middle part, I sort of had to readjust things. And then in the second half of the book, it definitely ramped up. I definitely started to enjoy it more. It started to hit more. It started to become a little bit more grimdark. And I really, really enjoyed that second half. So it's really just sort of a quarter in the middle that didn't quite work for me, but absolutely, I implore everyone to try it, have a go. I think it was an awesome book. I had a lot of fun. So it just wasn't always in a sort of style that I'm naturally drawn towards, but I always had fun. Now, let's talk about the characters. So we have the main character called Grim, and he's a really interesting character. He's kind of got a lot on his past with the riots, and he's very, very traumatized by these riots, and he's a bounty hunter, but he's a bit of a sweetheart. He's a very tame bounty hunter, I'd say. I think he kind of just found himself falling into it in his life. Then you have the rest of his hand. You have people like Sentix. Sentix was my favourite character. He's kind of like a very unusual character that he doesn't really say much. He's almost like a Groot-like character, except he does have more vocabulary than sort of one line. But he often says stuff about facing into the wind, and I loved him. I loved Sentix. He had a heart of gold, and I'm really excited to see, hopefully in the sequel, we see more of him and learn more about what's going on with him and his race that are all sort of very... Well, stoic's probably not the word, but they don't really reveal much. You know, they are stone creatures as well, so, you know, maybe their emotions are kind of like stone, I don't know. So we had this ranger called Garrett, and then we had Dunax and Lorelei, who are brother and sister. Dunax is a paladin with a difficult past that's sort of revealed. We also had Inak, and Inak was another one of my favourite characters, as well as Tak. Yeah, Tak. Tak is like this kind of like crazy, weird, creepy sort of mortician who, through sort of a set of circumstances, these characters end up meeting, and he ends up helping them on finding out what exactly is going on behind the scenes with this kind of conspiracy and all these different weird things that are happening. And Tak was, yeah, he was a very odd character, but I definitely really found him morbidly fascinating. The characters were all very distinctive, and there was definitely moments of light-hearted humour as well, and Joshua did a very good job at distinguishing them all, but there was never much character development. These characters didn't... There was attempts at it, and they were valiant attempts, but I never really felt that I went on a journey with these characters, you know. We never really got in deep to what these characters' backgrounds were, and their deep down emotions, you know. I wanted to dig deeper, and there's a lot there. It's just not really explored to the extent that it could have been. And so I'm really excited in the future to see Joshua grow as a writer and really lean into his strengths, because his writing, when he leans into it, is really, really strong. I think that he really could push those emotions, go that little bit further, that little bit deeper into his characters, perhaps a book even a little bit longer. And I'm not saying that just because I like chonkers. You know, I think it really would have benefited from a little bit of extended moments of exploration of these characters and a lot of the trauma that they're carrying with them. But I mean, some of the writing really struck me. This is the first book actually that I've kind of highlighted a lot. Sentences like, "I felt strangely at peace waking up on the day Alkan expected me to die. Black red blood, sticky wet, dripped from broken bowels into a gore-soaked mud of viscera and death." Or, "For 3 nights I existed in this sorry state, mind broken and rebroken by the trauma I endured. But I endured." You know, this stuff, there's some really, really great and beautiful lines in there. And I really would have loved to have seen, I mean, the city was such a character, the city of Lewokin. I would have loved to see more of the city, get more of an understanding of it and its character, because it really was vibrant and alive. And I was sort of disappointed that we didn't actually get much time in the city. And that city really was a character of its own. And so I'm really excited, hopefully in the future, to see Joshua lean more into his sort of character development and more into his style, because when he does it and when he indulges in that, then it's done really, really well. And as I say, at the end, it kind of draws together to a neat little close, as well as leaving some hooks. I think I would have liked to have seen more of what the series kind of overarching story is, there is a little sort of sense of foreboding at the end, but really throughout the rest of the book I was left wondering, where is this going? This feels very standalone. Now, for some people you're going to love that. For me, I really love that sense of scale and scope, and it doesn't have to be a Malazan or Wheel time scope, but I love that sense of this is where we're heading to, you know, there's stuff going on that even if we don't really touch upon it, at least we know that there's something going on in the wider world. And so I'm really intrigued to see where this series goes next, because we didn't really get much of a sense of what the whole connected storyline is. It is very much standalone with a little hook at the end. But overall, this was a fantastic book. I highly recommend it. It's like I say, it's like a gritty D&D kind of quest fantasy. I think that it was a really, really fantastic debut from Joshua. I think lots of people are going to love this. The atmosphere is absolutely dripping and oozing. I love it. I had a lot of fun. And even though I had a few little minor concerns with this book, that reasons why didn't fully work for me, I still absolutely give this a 4-star, because I rate my books based on enjoyment, right? I'm not the writer, you know. If I was writing it, there are other things I'd write differently, sure, but I'm a terrible writer, probably, you know. So I rate my books mostly based on enjoyment. And did I enjoy this book? Heck yeah, I did. So go support an indie author and debut indie author with an awesome D&D inspired grimdark book that you're sure to love, and even though the character development wasn't fully there, you will fall in love with some of these characters, especially Centix. I think he's going to be the one that stands out for a lot of readers here. So absolutely go check out this book. I'll put the links down below to Josh's Twitter, his website, as well as links to the book on Amazon. Thank you for watching, guys. Please like, subscribe. Let me know, is this something you're interested in? Does it sound fantastic? Do you think you're going to read it after seeing my review? Would you like to see more reviews? Anything, just down below. I'd love to interact with you guys. Until next time.